Hey, greetings. Um, this is a representation of a talk I developed a couple months ago for West Cook Wild Ones called "The Weed Assassin's Guide to Killing Stuff and Other Beautification Tips." You might wonder why I think, I get to call myself a weed assassin and why I think I'm an authority, which I'm really not, but I have a lot of experience. Starting, as a child, I think when I first became a gardener. I've always been a gardener. I think that started when my sister one day brought kohlrabi out of the garden and into the kitchen. It was like having, you know, flying saucers land in the kitchen. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. It was so different, and I realized there was something special about soil and seeds and sunlight and time. And I always gardened after that. Eventually, in my late 20s, I moved to southeast Kansas, which is a great place for gardening. And after a few years, I started working at the local city park as a seasonal, doing whatever they wanted me to do. And I worked in the gardens a lot, and they were always behind. They were always doing things that make them look better but didn't fix problems. And it always made me crazy. And after 4 years, I got to take over the horticulture, change the procedures. I didn't know the stuff they'd been doing was conventional landscape maintenance procedures. I was into growing food, and I knew that what they were doing would make me go hungry if I did it at home. So I eventually took over the landscaping completely, the gardening completely, changed a lot of procedures, and I do all these gory things, with annuals so that I could keep my job and spend time working with natives that I was bringing in out of the prairie and experimenting with. Eventually, because the park had a zoo, I belonged to a zoo horticulture organization. And through that organization, I met Christine Nye, who at that time was the horticulturist at the Shed Aquarium, Chicago. And in 2008, I married her, quit my job, moved to Illinois, and met all these people who'd been lit on fire by Bring Nature Home, which came out a year before. And they're really into native plants, and I'd been growing them for years, and I had techniques for maintaining them. So I worked through different jobs and eventually ended up with a company where I had a crew of 6 in 3 teams of 2, and together we maintained the ornamental plantings on about 120 different properties. Stuff going from every size residential you can imagine through helping Christine at the Shed Aquarium because no other contractors could, and just every kind of horticulture. And besides my own crazy stuff, this is a vegetable garden, believe it or not, full of poppies and larkspur. But we ate a lot of food out of this thing too. And what I learned through all these different experiences of growing all kinds of different things is that to control weeds, to manage weeds, you have to be present in the garden. It can't be something that you just do once in a while when the calendar says it's time. You have to be aware when there's a rain shower that there's a good chance that that shower will bring up seeds, weed seeds, some good, some bad. And you know that so many days after, and you just get in tune with what's going on in the garden. You have to be present. Okay, but better than killing weeds is preventing them. Now, how do you prevent weeds? Short term, I say when you plant, first put down 3 inches of leaf mulch and dig through that into the soil, plant your plants, and that takes care of you for a couple of years, really, as far as new stuff coming up. But long term, you need some other things to help you, and that is good site preps and using other plants. And we will get to those. But right now, we're just going to go into weeds. All right? Weeds. So what's a weed? Weed is a plant that's grown someplace you don't want it. This is a native plant, a wonderful native plant, Ruellia humilis, prairie petunia. I've had a relationship with these plants for 30 years. They're great. It's a true petunia. Each bloom just lasts 1 day. But in our garden, it turned out to be just kind of thuggish, and it was always showing up in the wrong place. And I finally decided to get rid of it. So I had to start learning to dig them out. And here's what I found when I dug one out. The crown there, where everything comes together, right there, that's the only part you really have to get out. All the roots below that can stay, but the crown, where everything comes together and the new growth, the new buds are, that needs to come. And on most plants, that's like right at the surface. So that's what you have to do. You have to just scoop that out of the ground. But these, they're 3 inches down, and that's kind of a nuisance. You have to dig more of a hole than you'd like to, but that's what you have to get out. Anything above that, it's coming back. It's coming back. Now that's a fibrous root. This is a taproot. Of course, a taproot, you want to get a good chunk of that out. The more the merrier. They don't pull like that very often, but that one did. Taproots, fibrous roots. There's also rhizomes, which are not roots. They're stems, but they're underground stems. And one little piece of that left in the ground. This is more on site prep thing. A little piece of that left alive underneath there will grow and will create an infestation of quackgrass. That's what this is, quackgrass. So those have to all be out, or you're just going to be pulling the stuff off the top year after year after year, which is what happens in a lot of gardens anyway. But anytime you see big white like that, there's an indication that there's a lot of life yet to come. Okay, and these are some more of those rhizomes on Canada goldenrod, which this is a brand new plant, just a few months old, and it's already got almost a foot span on those rhizomes. And a 2-3-year-old Canada goldenrod will take up a lot of room. Those rhizomes will all go out and make new stems. And you can't fight these in an established garden. You just have to pull them when you see them. Don't worry about the fact that all those rhizomes are in the ground. Except on site prep, it's too much disturbance. You know, for maintenance, it's too much disturbance. Okay, and always remember that most soil is full of weed seeds. So the more we disturb the soil, the more we get weeds, and the more we disturb these guys, the plants. 30 to 40% of the sunshine they're turning into food. They feed to the microbes in the soil. So that tells you that those microbes are pretty important to the plants, and we should be as nice to them as we can. Okay? Okay? Be nice to soils, but you know, you still have to kill weeds. They can be ugly. They can make it where you can't tell what you're looking at. They can produce a lot of seed, which gives you more problem down the road, or they can grow aggressively by these rhizomes. There are also bad reasons. They don't meet our expectations. You know, sometimes you're going to have things like Creeping Charlie, and it wasn't what you have planned, but how does the garden look, the whole thing? If it's pretty, then that's good. Don't get too hung up. Don't make extra work for yourself. You know, here's a weed that I let grow quite a while because it was fit in with some tall milkweed, and it was something to look at. But after a while, I got to the point where it was going to make flowers, and then it was going to make seeds, so it came out. But there are weeds that are so persistent that we need to make our peace with them. Creeping Charlie is the king of this. If you can keep it out of your garden, great, but once it's there, you're going to have it here or there, one way or another, for the rest of your life. And you have to not worry all the time. Wood sorrel's no big deal. Nutsedge, just don't get all worried about the little nuts that are being left in the ground when you pull them out, because if you get something else growing there, or you turn off the irrigation, you won't have nutsedge. It'll just go away. All right? So when you look at something like this, how much does it bother you that there's black medic and Creeping Charlie and wood sorrel in there? And probably a little nutsedge too, that all the 4 things I just showed you are in there. I don't know. I look at it and I think it looks all right. So let's look at some life cycles found among weeds: annual, biennial, perennial. The perennials should mostly be taken care of on the site prep, which we'll get to later, okay? The biennials, this is Hackalea, which is commonly called stick seed. You know, those little BB-sized burrs that get all over stuff and ruin clothing. This is it. This is it. It's a biennial. The first year, it has this little rosette. They're very reddish towards the base, and you could confuse them with a black-eyed Susan or a purple coneflower or something. And then the second year they have a different shaped leaf, but the veins in the leaf are the same. And it has a stem that's very firmly attached to the taproot. The first year rosette, those leaves aren't real strongly attached, and if you try to pull it out without using a little digging, it'll just break off and come back the next year. But once it has that stem coming up, that's attached directly to the root. You can pull straight up. This is true of most biennials. Pull straight up so you don't break it off, and then you don't get all those little burrs. Yeah. And of course, annuals. Most of our garden weeds are cool season Eurasian agricultural weeds. So they come up early in the spring, and then they make seed real fast. They're also the ones of wheat, which here's some nice examples. These are winter annuals. They come up in the fall after you plant your wheat. Veronica, dead nettle, I forget what that is, and hensbit, and these little cresses. You know, they're going to make seed. They're going to come up. But what do they need to germinate? They need soil contact. They need moisture. They need sunlight. And sunlight's the key. A weed seed that's an inch down is not going to germinate as long as we leave it there. As long as we leave it there. So here's the tools that I use. These long diamond-bladed scuffle hoe. You shave the earth with them. You use them standing up, which is wonderful. And here's how you can work very delicately. This is a young herb garden that's much bigger now, and you can work right around the little bitty plants that are in there. You'll see one off to the left here coming up pretty soon. Yeah. See, there's a oregano or something in there, just a baby that we just planted, and boom, pretty soon it's clean. It can grow. You'll miss a few. Come back in a month or so and do it again. There's a dandelion. You got to get a little more. That's a first-year dandelion, so you know you want 2 or 3 inches of that, and you can cut it off with that if you dig it in, but usually you don't run it that deep. They're really nice. They're really nice. I use a double sheath of pruners with a saw knife. You might wonder what I do with the pruners in a garden where I'm killing weeds. Is little trees. If you plunge the pruner in the ground and cut the tree off an inch below the soil line where the red arrows are, then it won't grow back. And a spade like this. You want a spade where the blade is parallel with the plane of the handle. And so it's a straight shot. And here's a little video of me taking out quackgrass. Most rhizomes are up in the 2 to 3 inch deep range. So if you're 4 inches going horizontally, you're underneath them, and you can lift them all out of the ground. But you have to be really thorough, and you have to come back time after time and find ones you missed before that you're going to get again. This is actually the second time I went through this bed. But now, today, there isn't any quackgrass in it. But it takes time and a lot of work. It's kind of a pain. So let's talk about a different kind of weeding. Editing. Removing volunteer plants. You know, when you do this kind of gardening, you let stuff make seed. And the seed, it feeds birds, and it's great to have. It can be really beautiful. It doesn't all get eaten. And some of the stuff that doesn't get eaten, plants, grows, and sometimes it's beautiful. I call it the secret sauce. It comes out in spots where you never expect it. Sometimes it makes a mess, and sometimes there's too much of it. What the heck is it? This bed has coneflowers, and it has liatris, so that must all be liatris. That can be thinned out. Yeah, liatris, which is beautiful, right? So it can be thinned out. Here's this, these are sedges on the left, and these are little penstemons on the right. And that's just too many of them in that space. And sometimes you can, transplant stuff, but sometimes you just have to thin it out a little bit. As you can see here, this is working, and you're wasting a lot, but this was 1 square foot. And the day that I did that, I maintained tens of thousands of square feet. Here's a little before and after. This is the same spot. Most of the weeds here are white wood aster and black medic. And I took them all out and left right up by the hoe on the head of the hoe on the right. I left a New England aster there that someday will be beautiful. And next time I might leave something else somewhere else. But that's what I found that I wanted that time. And it's good to get advice from other gardeners. This lady, she'd had this beautiful garden that had just gotten overgrown. It wasn't that pretty to look at anymore. And she was asking advice of a group that we have. And we were agreeing with her. Yeah, it doesn't look pretty anymore. Go ahead and pull that stuff out. Go ahead and start removing stuff. Start changing how that is. At my house, a lot of asters. Not as many anymore. It used to be a lot of volunteer asters just came in from nowhere, and a lot of volunteer common milkweed that late in the season I would be pulling because it just got too cluttered looking. The asters, I generally don't get the whole mat out like that. Anyway, and the milkweed, we let them bloom, and then I go through and check for eggs and caterpillars, and the plants that don't have those get pulled, and the ones that do get left. And then you want to cut some of your milkweed off so it'll put out new shoots, because the caterpillars like those fresh new shoots. And here it is after editing. You can see there's still quite a bit of milkweed, but it's not obtrusive. It doesn't make the thing ugly. There's milkweed right front and center, but you know, it doesn't look too coarse. It blends right in. It looks good. Site preps, we're going to be real quick. If you want to kill turf, there's 1,000 ways. They're easy to do. I'm not going to waste your time with them. But if you want to kill stuff that's hard to kill, I have used chemical methods. I've used excavation. I've used everything on all of these, and they're all tough. And you don't want to disturb it too much. Here's a place where all this stuff was all growing at once right next to my property and all creeping across onto my property. And I got permission from the homeowner, and when there was a tree crew working in the neighborhood, I went over and talked to them, and they came over. I made sure it was live green wood and asked them if they needed a place to dump, and they put it there, and I spread it out about 1.5 feet thick. And this is in the summer. In the next spring, a few Canada thistle came up, and I pulled them out and never saw them again. Other stuff, a few things with the goutweed would start coming up through. I hoed it out a few times, it quit. Same with some of the daylilies. But the bindweed just kept coming back and kept coming back. So in the second year, I got put another foot of wood chips on top of that bindweed, and I have not seen it since. Now it's off in my yard, so it's slowly creeping back. But there's big areas here that were infested where there's none coming up. It's really neat. So this method works, but it takes a lot of patience. Okay, so using other plants. Cool season ground covers, early summer blooming plants, rural species, and other stuff like prairie dropseed, this grass on the right. Take a hedge trimmer and clean up those stems a little bit, and the ground is covered. You don't have to mess with it. There's vegetation there. On the left, those are all penstemons in January. There's sure no weeds coming up through that. On the left here is Robin's plantain, Originum pulchillus in January. Look how pretty that is. In May, it puts on these nice little daisies. Great for filling and will really spread, and you can divide it aggressively and cover a lot of ground in a short time by your cultural methods. Prairie smoke I love to use because it turns your garden beautiful early in the season. And then right in the center you see those native alum root, heuchera. Those, again, early in the season have a rosette. The same size as that plant, almost that big. There's a rosette there. There's no weeds coming up. And here is the prairie smoke in June, and on the left is the flowers, the yellow, not in the background, but on the left is the flowers of the heuchera, which are quite lovely. Okay, other things that, so plants that are good for this are prairie smoke, pussy toes for drier places, robin's plantain, wild ginger. Wild strawberry are fantastic. Allegheny spurges are native pachysandra. Wild violets work. They can be a little coarse, but they're easy to remove when you have something else that you want to put in there. And sedges, that's a whole nother presentation, but the field trials at the Mount Cuba Center, if you just Google Mount Cuba sedge evaluation, there's sedges for the mid-Atlantic state, but those recommendations hold here. They're really good. It's a really good resource. And you mix these things so you get different depths and shapes of root systems in the soil. Other things, the penstemons, the alum root, golden alexanders, just because they're aggressive in the spring. Anything that's aggressive in the spring. The poppy mallows are a summer blooming thing, but they cover the ground with rosette. The dropseed, the monardas, because they're so aggressive, while geraniums cover ground early. Virginia bluebells not only cover ground really densely, really early, but then they completely vanish. They just disappear. And you can grow other stuff in the same space. This is a ruderal species. This is Monarda punctata. They only live for a couple of years. They produce a lot of seeds. So when I pull a big weed out of the garden and the soil gets stirred up, maybe this is what'll come up, and it'll fill that space for a couple of years and then die and not disturb the soil when it does. They're covered with wasps, great for pollinators, beautiful winter interest when you have them. So in summary, we want to manage unwanted plants with good site preps, other plants, your presence in the garden, your relationships with other gardeners who can give you advice on what to do about different problems. And you never know. So I'd like to end this with the care of the earth is our most ancient, most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility. To cherish what remains of it and to foster its renewal is our only legitimate hope. I agree with that to a large extent. I think we do have other legitimate hopes, and we need to take care of all of them that we can. Thank you very much. Feel free to follow me on YouTube, on Instagram.